Central-local collusion in debt resolution, from changing the accounting label to eventual default. This is Jersey News Commentary Channel. Recently, China's State Council once again held a meeting on resolving local government debt risks. Premier Li Qiang emphasized the need to strengthen local responsibility, improve debt resolution support policies, and enhance local governments' independent debt repayment capacity. At first glance, many people thought Beijing had finally become serious about dealing with local debt. But here is the problem in a country where more than 98% of local governments are running fiscal deficits, where many counties and cities can barely pay civil servants and teachers or even openly adopt the slogan guarantee 6 months of salary, strive for 8, where land finance has completely collapsed and the real estate market continues to decline. What exactly are local governments supposed to use for independent debt repayment? So what does debt resolution really mean? In my view, this grand campaign of so-called debt resolution is not about solving debt problems at all. It is a giant debt laundering game jointly orchestrated by the central and local governments. Its core is not repayment, but delay. Not resolution, but transfer. Not stopping the bleeding, but continuing the transfusion. In the end, the most likely outcome is that hundreds of trillions of yuan in local debt will simply be defaulted on. Debt resolution is not repayment, it is merely changing the accounting label. One of the Chinese government's favorite buzzwords today is debt resolution. It sounds highly professional, sophisticated, and managerial. But if you carefully dissect it, you will discover that China's version of debt resolution has little to do with genuine debt restructuring in a normal market economy. It is a uniquely Chinese political euphemism. What does it actually mean? Not eliminating debt, but renaming debt. For example, borrowing new debt to repay old debt, replacing short-term debt with long-term debt, replacing high-interest debt with lower-interest debt, converting hidden debt into official debt, forcing banks to roll over loans, repackaging local government financing vehicle LGFV debt as operational debt, or even injecting fresh loans into already failed projects to create the illusion of normal operations. So the Chinese Communist Party's so-called debt resolution is not debt repayment at all. It is debt relocation. Today, debt moves from the finance bureau to local financing platforms. Tomorrow, it moves from financing platforms to banks. The day after tomorrow, it moves from banks to AMCs. AMC stands for Asset Management Company. In Chinese, it is called an asset management company, but in reality, it is essentially a bad debt recycling station, or more bluntly, a financial garbage dump. How large is China's local government debt? What is truly frightening in China is not official debt, but hidden debt. According to China's Ministry of Finance, by early 2026, official local government debt stood at around 56 trillion yuan. Many people look at that number and think the situation is still manageable. But the problem is that is only the debt on the surface and only according to official claims. The truly terrifying liabilities are hidden beneath the surface. International mainstream estimates suggest that debt held by local government financing vehicles LGFVs has already reached roughly 70 trillion yuan. Debt-like financing created through PPP projects is estimated at around 12 to 20 trillion yuan. According to China's Ministry of Finance PPP database, by the end of 2021, total investment in PPP projects reached 16.2 trillion yuan, of which roughly 12 trillion yuan consisted of debt financing. Government guidance funds also represent another massive pool, totaling around 12 trillion yuan. According to 02 IPO data, by 2024 China had established 2,178 government guidance funds, with a target scale of approximately 12.84 trillion yuan and subscribed capital of around 7.7 trillion yuan. Industrial and venture capital guidance funds alone accounted for more than 10 trillion yuan. At the same time, these guidance funds are filled with disguised debt arrangements such as equity in name, debt in substance, guaranteed returns, government buyback commitments. Because the scale is enormous and highly opaque, the true amount is impossible to determine accurately. In addition, there are development zone financing, land reserve loans, state-owned enterprise proxy construction, public institution financing, unpaid contractor bills, delayed government expenditures, and much more. Using a broad definition, debt tied to China's local government system has already exceeded 170 trillion yuan and may even approach 200 trillion yuan. Most dangerously, the overwhelming majority of these debts lack genuine cash flow. Many projects were never capable of generating profits from the very beginning. Bridges, highways, plazas, new districts, industrial parks, airports, subway systems, future technology cities. Many are political vanity projects and performance showcase projects. So why did everyone keep borrowing? Because for years, everyone assumed local governments would never collapse, the central government would always bail them out, and any project backed by the government was inherently safe. As a result, China's financial system spent decades doing one thing, treating political credit as market credit. That is how today's gigantic debt bomb was created. The real question is, can political credit truly be trusted? San. Why has local government debt kept exploding? When local governments run out of money, what do? They borrow. Thus China invented something almost unique in the world, local government financing vehicles. On the surface, they are companies. In reality, they are shadow finance ministries for local governments. How did local debt spiral out of control? I would summarize it into roughly 5 mechanisms. First, after the 1994 tax-sharing reform, the central government took most tax revenue while local governments bore most expenditures. Education, healthcare, infrastructure, social security, stability maintenance, bureaucracy, investment promotion. The responsibilities were concentrated locally. Local governments had greater spending obligations than fiscal authority. Their revenues could not cover expenditures. This was an externally imposed pressure mechanism. Second, local governments were not allowed to issue debt directly, so they circumvented restrictions through LGFVs. This was a classic case of countermeasures beneath official policy and innovation mechanism within the political system. Third, local governments injected land, resources, and concession rights into financing platforms. Most importantly, land reserves were used as collateral to secure bank loans through government-backed platforms. This became the core engine of LGFV debt expansion. Fourth, the 2008 4 trillion yuan stimulus became the catalytic explosion point. The central government only directly contributed 1.18 trillion yuan. The rest had to be financed mainly by local governments. As a result, LGFV debt expanded dramatically. Fifth, infrastructure projects often have extremely long investment cycles, low returns, or no returns at all. Yet financing is short-term and expensive. This naturally encourages endless borrowing to repay old borrowing. This became a built-in debt rolling mechanism. Research by Peking University's China Economic Research Center pointed out that many LGFVs were essentially empty shell companies created around land assets used as collateral. Land became the lifeblood of local finance. A large body of research has also shown that land sales, real estate-related taxes, and bank loans collateralized by land became the 3 pillars of local government financing. Thus China entered the cycle of land financing infrastructure land sales refinancing. This model could survive as long as property prices kept rising. But now, China's real estate market has been falling for 3 years. In my judgment, it will continue declining for many years. Land is no longer selling. Developers are collapsing on a massive scale. Households have exhausted their leverage capacity. Local land sale revenue has been cut in half and may continue shrinking further. Yet local government spending has not declined accordingly. So what happens? More borrowing. At this point, China's debt system has entered its most dangerous phase. Debt is no longer borrowed for development. It is borrowed simply for survival. Independent debt repayment capacity is pure political jargon. The State Council now demands that local governments improve their independent debt repayment capacity. But where exactly is this independent capacity? Many counties and cities are already financially hollowed out. Across China, wages go unpaid, bus systems shut down, teachers face salary cuts, hospitals owe wages, civil servant bonuses disappear, contractors are unpaid, and local governments increasingly rely on predatory fines and extortion-style law enforcement campaigns for revenue. In recent years, non-tax revenue has surged by more than 10% annually, clear evidence of fiscal desperation. After the collapse of land finance, local governments lost their most important revenue source. Yet they still lack genuine independent taxing authority. Most tax revenue remains concentrated in Beijing. This creates an absurd situation. The central government orders local governments to repay debt themselves. But with what money? In reality, there are probably only 2 possible paths. Path 1, borrow new debt to repay old debt. This is exactly what China has been doing in recent years. Local governments keep issuing new debt. Beijing keeps approving refinancing bonds. In 2024, China launched the so-called 10 trillion yuan debt resolution plan, including 6 trillion yuan in hidden debt swaps. In 2025, local bond issuance exceeded 10 trillion yuan for the first time. Of this, around 4.6 to 4.8 trillion yuan consisted of refinancing bonds. That is what China calls debt resolution, simply replacing old debt with new debt. Banks are pressured to keep extending loans. Platforms continue rolling over debt. The essence is a giant debt snowball. This model can only survive under two conditions: continuously rising real estate prices and high economic growth. But both conditions have disappeared. As a result, bank lending increasingly follows political orders rather than commercial judgment. Banks no longer dare think independently. They simply obey the party. Consequently, the entire banking system is becoming hostage to local government debt. Small and medium-sized banks have already begun collapsing in batches because many LGFV debts generate no real cash flow. According to the South China Morning Post, at least 162 small and medium-sized banks were merged, dissolved, or deregistered in 2024 alone. By the end of 2025, another 377 small banks had disappeared. By April 2026, more than 120 rural banks had shut down. The Chinese government never calls this bankruptcy. Instead, it uses softer terms such as mergers, absorption, dissolution, restructuring, deregistration, reform, delisting. But banks still dare not recognize losses. Because once losses are recognized, bank capital would evaporate almost instantly. So the only option is to keep local financing platforms alive. It resembles a terminal cancer patient receiving endless painkiller injections. The injections increase, but the disease only worsens. Yo. Path to eventual default. This is the truly dangerous direction. Because many local financing platforms are already fundamentally incapable of repayment. So what happens next? Default. Of course, the CCP will never openly say default. Instead, it will use elegant new terminology: market-oriented restructuring, debt swaps, asset revitalization, payment extensions, classified disposal, risk isolation, orderly deleveraging. Translated into plain language, we are not paying. The most likely future scenario is massive LGFV defaults, banks forced to absorb losses, AMCs taking over bad debt, insurance funds trapped, trust products exploding, waves of bank failures, followed by limited central government bailouts. And who ultimately pays? Not officials. Not policymakers. But ordinary Chinese citizens. Because in the end, the burden will be shifted through excessive money printing, RMB depreciation, ultra-low interest rates, shrinking pensions, collapsing public services, severe cuts in healthcare and education spending, rising utility costs, higher taxes and fees. This is the true meaning of China's so-called debt resolution. Qi. China's economic model has reached its end. Many people think China's local debt crisis is merely a management problem or technical issue. I completely disagree. It is actually a sign that China's entire economic model has reached the end of the road. For decades, China's growth depended on land, real estate, infrastructure, debt expansion, and 疯狂 local government financing. But now, real estate keeps falling month after month, the population is shrinking rapidly, consumption is weakening, foreign capital is leaving, millions of private businesses are collapsing, unemployment continues surging, and local governments survive almost entirely through new borrowing. Yet the CCP refuses reform and is increasingly aggressive in crushing reformist forces. For example, reducing political power, reducing stability maintenance spending, allowing bad debts to surface, allowing market liquidation, allowing entrenched interests to suffer losses. None of this is politically possible. Anyone who touches these issues becomes a target. Thus the only remaining strategy is delay, borrow, repackage, and keep changing the accounting label. Therefore, China's so-called debt resolution today is no longer merely economic decay beyond repair. It is political decay approaching inevitable collapse. And so China's debt machine will continue spinning wildly, until one day, it can spin no more.